VGC and the game of competitive Pokemon as a whole will never actually go away. This is because other competitive games are way more linear in the way that they play. Because in a tactical shooter, you load in and you play the same objectives and you fight the same fights every single match. But in Pokemon, unless we're in a meta where there is one team running rampant and is over 50% usage, which is very rare, you have a higher likelihood of running into something that you will never see again than you have running into the same team back to back. This is because Pokemon is one of the hardest games ever created, and half of the skill doesn't even come in the battle itself. Creating a team that meets your every need for any given situation is actually way more important than navigating a Pokemon match. Of course, we see the best players win very often, but we also see players who may not have been the better player in their matchup win because their team was better than their opponents. And as the game grows older and more Pokemon and abilities get added, the most creative players can always come up with a new team to beat the current threats. Additionally, with these new Pokemon being added every few years, it unlocks the ability to use some of the older Pokemon that may have been forgot about as they have a great matchup into the newer threats. So VGC has a giant cycle where new Pokemon get added and then people figure out how to counter these Pokemon. But what if I told you the Game Freak added a Pokemon so versatile that it's impossible to game plan for? Because if you sacrifice to game plan against this Pokemon, you need to take up half of your team slots, which will leave you with very few options for the remainder of the opponent's team. And when I say this Pokemon is versatile, I don't mean that it's just splashable and you can put it on any team and find a role for it, something similar to Incineroar and Amoonguss, or in the way that it can be ran as a physical or special attacker, or fast or slow. I mean that even without touching its EVs or its move pool, it can fill 4 completely different roles on any given team. Now, of course, the Pokemon is in the thumbnail, so you do know that it's Ogerpon already. So Ogerpon is a legendary Pokemon added in the Scarlet and Violet Teal Mask DLC. Ogerpon is a pure grass type in its base form. But when holding any of her 3 masks, she can turn into a fire type, a rock type, or a water type on top of that grass typing. This on its own can change the matchup against Ogerpon significantly, as the weaknesses change depending on which form this has. So if you're testing your team and you find that you're struggling into that Zamazenta matchup, consider switching your Ogerpon Cornerstone, which is weak to both of Zamazenta's stabs, to Ogerpon Hearthflame, who does not take super effective damage from Zamazenta and deals super effective damage in return. These 4 Ogerpon forms being Ogerpon with the Teal Mask, the Hearthstone Mask, the Cornerstone Mask, and the Wellspring Mask, all have the exact same base stats, with very respectable distribution, having 80 HP, 84 defense, 96 special defense, 110 speed, and 120 attack. This means that maybe in a lower power format, you can build a very bulky Ogerpon to sit there on the field and do sustainable damage. But in a high power format like Regulation I, where restricted Pokemon are allowed, maybe a faster glass cannon sort of Ogerpon will work better. But this incredibly OP concept of being able to just switch into 4 different Pokemon at a whim seems a little bit too good to be true. But the thing that makes this even remotely balanced is the fact that it takes up an item slot in order to change into any of these 3 forms. Because as mentioned before, you do need to be holding either the Fire, Rock, or Water mask. But the default form of Ogerpon that is just a pure grass type can hold an item. So you might think that something like a Choice Scarf Ogerpon is going crazy in the metagame. But the other 3 are so much more popular, and there's a reason for it. So first off, grass type is only super effective against 3 types, and it is resisted by 7 different typings. And literally every other Ogerpon form, with its additional typing, hits either even or more types for super effective damage than they have resisted. This is because fire is resisted by 4 types and super effective against 4 types. Water is super effective against 3 and resisted by 3. And rock is super effective against 4 and resisted by only 3. So giving your Ogerpon that offensive boost with its item slot doesn't actually help it as much as you'd think when the grass type stab only gets it so far. So with all this talk about typings, I feel the need to mention that it has a signature move in Ivy Cudgel. This is a 100 base power move with an increased critical hit ratio. It is grass type by default to match Ogerpon, of course, but with each mask, it changes to the typing that this mask gives. This means that Ivy Cudgel will be rock type, fire type, or water type depending on the type of Ogerpon you're using. This Pokemon has a 100 base power signature move that cannot miss, and this guarantees that it gets stab no matter which form it's using. And I feel the need to emphasize this because Zacian has a 90 base power, 90% accurate move as its best source of Fairy Stab. We are talking about a Pokemon that absolutely destroyed the entire metagame when it was legal, with a 90% accurate 90 base power move. So Ivy Cudgel is just one of the best signature moves in the game. So does having good stab along with the ability to change typings make you the best Pokemon or the most versatile Pokemon? Absolutely not. But another thing along with Ivy Cudgel switching typings is that the abilities change depending on which mask it's holding. And yes, you heard me correctly, I said abilities. So in her base form, Ogerpon has the ability Defiant, which takes any stat-lowering moves or abilities and turns them into a +2 attack stat. If you hit a Pokemon with Defiant with an Icy Wind that drops their speed by 1 stage, they will in turn get a +2 attack stat while still suffering that -1 speed drop. This ability is great for reversing Intimidate by giving you a +1 attack stat instead of a -1 attack stat. Next is Ogerpon Hearthflame, which gets the ability Mold Breaker, which does damage to the opponent ignoring abilities. This means that Ogerpon can hit a Heatran with a Fire-type move despite it having the ability Flash Fire. Or hit a Sudowoodo with a super effective Wood Hammer and pick up a one-hit KO despite the Sturdy ability. Now that was just for the sake of example, do not use Sudowoodo, please. The next is Ogerpon Wellspring, who has the Water Absorb ability, which means when it is hit by a Water-type move, it gains a quarter of its max HP instead of taking damage. This provides an immunity and a safe switch into any Pokemon on your team that may be weak to Water-type moves. And finally, Ogerpon Cornerstone has the ability Sturdy, which of course protects your Pokemon from being one-hit KO'd. So all of these abilities are great in their own right, but when Ogerpon terastallizes, it gains access to its signature ability. This ability is called Embody Aspect, and every time Ogerpon terastallizes, it raises one of its stats. These stats are decided based on which mask the Ogerpon is holding, and the base form gets a speed boost every time it terastallizes. Ogerpon Hearthflame instead gets an attack boost, Wellspring gets a special defense boost, and Cornerstone gets a defense boost. Again, in an attempt to balance this Pokemon that they seem to have given every single tool in the game to, you are only allowed to terastallize to the type of your mask. So a base form Ogerpon with the teal mask has to terastallize into a grass type, and Hearthflame has to be a fire type. So whereas some Pokemon would like to terastallize into a different typing to avoid a weakness, Ogerpon is locked into only using their terastallization for offense. But keep in mind, with terastallization, you do drop your grass typing, so terastallizing could be the beneficial play in a lot of scenarios where the opponent will go for a move that is super effective on grass. This is the only way to defensively terastallize on Ogerpon. So going back to what I said earlier in the video, where you can run a bulky Ogerpon to just sit on the field, but with everything I've given you so far, you would think that's not really true. Besides the defensive stat boosts of terastallizing 2 of the 4 Ogerpon forms, everything else is all-out offense. Only being able to give yourself a stab boost from terastallization with no defensive terras, a guaranteed stab move that is 100 base power with an increased critical hit ratio, 120 attack with 110 speed. But finally, when we get to the move pool, you see why Ogerpon can be run in this defensive way. You see, Ogerpon has an incredible supportive move pool. With access to moves like Follow Me, Taunt, Encore, and many more, Ogerpon is a threat whenever it is on the field. And with its very high base attack stat and base speed stat, you can invest some EVs into your bulk and stay around for a lot longer. If trained properly, an Ogerpon Hearthflame, who is a fire type, can survive an Ivy Cudgel from an Ogerpon Cornerstone, who is a rock type. And knowing that you are bulky enough to live that can allow for a lot of outplay potential. Especially since the Hearthflame can hit right back and one-hit KO that same Ogerpon. But not only does Ogerpon have access to Follow Me, which can allow its teammate to set up or get itself in a good position by picking up quick KOs, but with access to moves like Wood Hammer, Ivy Cudgel, and Grassy Glide, as well as Swords Dance and Trailblaze, Ogerpon can put itself in a great offensive position by either setting up or picking up quick KOs as well. It gets access to a pivoting move in U-turn, it gets knockoff, as well as Helping Hand to help its restricted partners in this format. So this Pokemon is actually designed to be usable in any meta ever when it is legal. Of course, Ogerpon won the World Championships in the one season it was legal, and I predict that it will win again this year. But which form of Ogerpon will win? We don't know, and the team builders really don't know either. And this stems from the whole point of the video, and this Pokemon is impossible to game plan for. We may see a loaded dice, unmasked Ogerpon win the entire thing with Bullet Seed. Or maybe we'll see the one that won last year repeat and do it again, with Hearthflame just spamming Ivy Cudgel and Follow Me. There was a set we saw recently with Follow Me Ogerpon Cornerstone with the Sturdy ability, just drawing in attacks while the Calyrex Shadow Rider to its side set up Nasty Plot. You truly never know what the team builders are going to come up with, but with Ogerpon, it can be anything. So, let me know what your favorite type of Ogerpon is in the comments. Mine personally is the unmasked form. I think it is a beautifully designed Pokemon. So yeah, let me know in the comments. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It does let YouTube and I know that you want to see more of this content. Ogerpon is easily one of my favorite Pokemon they've ever made, and easily my favorite Pokemon from Generation 9. So, I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and as always, have a great day.